Hi, we're here to talk about fairy tales. Today I'm Red and I'm joined by
Princess Star Pony
and Prime 34 and Quack Quack.
So, we've been thinking about what fairy tales are and what qualifies something as a fairy tale. We've wondered about what differentiates a fairy tale from a folk tale and whether or not fairy tales have changed since the tradition isn't oral anymore, but it's changed mediums to television, movies, books for children, and things like that. So we're going to share our opinions about fairy tales and a little bit about their history. And let's hear first from Princess Star Pony.
Princess Star Pony.
Princess Star Pony.
Quack Quack.
Okay, what is the difference between fairy tales and other types of stories? Well, a fairy tale often has a fantastical element, magic or made-up creatures, and also modern tales don't have the original gory Grimms as the original.
One thing that I found really interesting as well, you mentioned the fairies, is that the original stories were told by women, right, around the hearth, around the kitchen table, told to children, but also told to adults. They weren't originally about fairies, right? The tales that the Grimms collected. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Do you remember what we learned that they're originally about?
They're originally about wise women.
Yeah, and later on, when different men wrote them down, for instance, Perrault in France changed the wise women to fairies with fairy dust and sparkly, pretty dresses and things like that, and wings and wands. Yeah, and then I think that was really great how you also talked about how in the past they used to be more Grimm, which is fitting with the brothers Grimm, right?
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
I mean, they were, more dark.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of a original fairy tale that was very disturbing compared to how it was changed later on for children?
Quack Quack.
Snow White. In the original Snow White fairy tale, the Wicked Queen thought she was eating Snow White's heart.
Oh, that's so disgusting. That's right.
She thought she was a cannibal.
I listened to you read that story to me, and I remember that the huntsman brought her a boar's heart instead of Snow White's heart, and she cooked it, salted it, and ate it, thinking she was eating Snow White's heart. So that was cannibalism
Quack,
in the
quack,
original
quack.
tale. That's very disgusting. Good. Thanks for sharing that bit of history with us. We'll come back to you in just a second. Prime 34? Mm-hmm. So what is your take on original versus newer fairy tales? I know you had some things to say about Disney in particular in their version of fairy tales.
Well, I noticed that in Disney, they have a lot of princesses kind of running away from their families. Like, the stepmother in Cinderella, the Tangled, or Rapunzel, whatever you prefer, and probably many others. Well, I wouldn't count Moana as much because she does come back in the end. So,
And what does that have to do? Do you feel like with the original, or do you have any comments about that?
apparently some of the originals, were kind of like supposed to it was kind of like not exactly like a sign or anything, but it was just like telling you kind of be cautious of other people because jealousy, like I believe in a Brothers Grimm story. One of them, the Cinderella story was originally where someone the two sisters literally chopped their toes off just so they could fit into the shoe, or the glass slipper.
That's right. So again, the originals were much more grim and dark, and there was dismemberment, right? Not just squishing their toes in for the comedy of the Disney version.
And also, at Cinderella's wedding, the birds didn't lead Cinderella to the altar. They pecked out the stepsister's eyes.
Oh, wow. So even the animals and the wildlife in the original versions were much more maybe dark, not necessarily sinister, because they were giving the comeuppance to the characters who'd done bad things, right? They were doling out justice, maybe. So in the German tradition, the folktale or fairy tale is called a Märchen. And I thought that was really interesting that it became, fairy tale became synonymous with the German stories, and that the Grimm brothers were originally trying to preserve German culture. And then I was wondering why the Grimm stories in particular, and Hans Christian Andersen as well, became so popular in the U.S., because there are so many other folk tales and fairy tales and those kinds of stories, legends, myths around the world. Remember, we had learned a little bit about the Zuni, for instance. Remember their version of Cinderella? Who was the fairy godmother?
A turkey.
A wild turkey. Yeah.
Quack, quack related.
And so what do you think? Why are the Grimm tales so popular here, do you think?
Maybe because people kind of like this stuff today. Like, there's still a lot of gore in movies now. There's more gore in stories. Like, a bunch of Stephen King books have a lot of gore, and there's a lot of Stephen King movies that have gore. So maybe people just like to hear, read, watch. Of course, they probably wouldn't want to do it, but they just like to watch people's heads get taken off. But
Eek.
Whatever.
That's scary. I was thinking
scared.
also just that the Western culture became more dominant here with the languages of German, French, and English, of course, being incorporated into the language of the dominant culture here that kind of overtook, right, the rest of the cultures that were already here, of the indigenous peoples that were already here. So we just, in general, in our history, don't tend to learn as much about the indigenous culture. So it seems like a wild turkey godmother seems kind of incredible to us. But if that was a story that we'd grown up with, we wouldn't think it was very strange.
No.
Right? So are these stories more for children or for adults?
Well, are we talking about the originals or the new ones?
Well, that's the question.
The new ones, like Walt Disney made fairy tales into like more kind of what we like today. Like, who would want to see Cinderella's sisters chop their toes off and have their eyes pecked out?
So children wouldn't like to see that.
No, but
No.
That's more horror, right? And maybe adults like to see that. Or, some adults, I don't really like to watch horror all that much. Oh, remember we were talking, too, about the difference between seeing something in a movie versus the oral tradition of hearing it?
Yeah.
Princess Unicorn Pony? I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Princess Star Pony.
Princess Star Pony, will you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on listening to something or reading something versus seeing it, and how that changes your perspective?
Well, when I listen to something, I have my own image of what it might be. Like, if it's someone's walking around with their head off, they're walking it like a dog. Or
I've heard, for instance,
something.
that your mama wrote a book called Landscape with Headless Mama. Is that right?
Yes.
So, just hearing that, does that scare you?
No.
But if you saw that,
What?
it'd be a little scarier.
If I was going off with a headless mama, that probably would be scary.
Okay, sorry, I cut you off. So your point, if someone was walking around with a head?
Yeah, if they were walking their head like a dog, I would think that's very scary if I just heard that. But then if I watched a movie of that, then I would probably not want to watch that movie.
That'd be too freaky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to be back in just a moment with more about whether fairy tales are for adults or children. But first, let's take a quick break to listen to the Mystery sound. Okay, while Princess Star Pony is getting the mystery sound ready, we will hear from our sponsor about this duck.
Quack, quack, quack. Quack, 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 quack. Hello, Quack. My name is Quack Quack, and I like quackers. Today, I think I should read you an interesting piece by me. Walt Disney still made some of the best stories, but did you know they really didn't come from him? Some of them may have been turned and spinned, but a lot of them came from Brothers Grimm and other famous people. Quack, quack, quack!
That was very interesting, Quack Quack. Thank you so much. Okay, Princess Star Unicorn. Pony. I just want to make you a unicorn. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll be a unicorn. Princess Star Unicorn. Sure, what?
Unicorn pink.
Are you ready with our mystery sound? Okay, here we go. What do you think this sound could be? We're still listening to this mystery sound. Here we go. There's a little bit more of this mystery sound.
As Walt Disney said, Disneyland.
I'm trying to make we're not hearing the actual.
Just think, all of this is yours.
So if you have any guesses, let us know what you think that mystery
Mystery
sound
sound.
could be, and stay tuned. We'll let you know at the end of the show what was that mystery sound. So who's J.R.R. Tolkien?
J.R.R. Tolkien is he's an author who's most famous for Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
That's right. So I have a quote here from him. He wrote, "If fairy stories are worth reading, they're worthy to be written for and read by adults. They'll put more in and get more out than children can." Do you feel offended by that as a child?
Yes.
Explain.
Well, he's basically saying that children won't understand stories.
I mean, is that what he's saying? What do you think? You haven't been talking at all, Prime.
I don't really take that as an offense, because
Prime, will you sit up, because I don't think the readers can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't take that as
listeners.
I don't take that as a offense. I take that. I really don't take that as an offense, because some children are good at reading and some aren't. So some children might think, this is really hard, I don't want to read it, I'll read it later. But rather, some children will be like, oh yes, I want to read this, I want to read this, I want to read this.
Okay, so I think that you're both right, and that he just means that there is so much to get out of a fairy tale and a folk tale, and that sometimes children might just love the fun and the magic of it, and that's wonderful. But there are also deeper layers of meaning and symbolism. We were talking a little bit about that before, and I know you both had some interesting things to say as well. What do you think about that?
It was like, it's kind of like this one little short story, about this farmer who kept digging down, and he found like this little rock or something. So he could have decided not to keep digging down because he found something and he didn't want to keep digging because he was scared. But he kept digging down and he found a room full of treasure. So he could have been scared and said, I'm done, my days of work, and boom, I'm done. But instead, he wasn't scared to do anything and dig down, diggy down, diggy down.
And so you keep digging and you might find what?
Treasure.
Yeah, so you see something that might be scary at first, but you just keep digging and you find that there is more to it. What do you think, Princess Star Pony Unicorn?
I think that fairy tales are useful to kids when preparing for adulthood, teaching lessons about using intelligence and wit.
Oh, that's right. So you can learn things because you're using your intelligence and wit to understand them, and it's showing you how the characters use their intelligence and wit to get out of situations. That, for instance, we were talking about Jack and the Beanstalk a little bit.
Yeah.
How does Jack and the Beanstalk use his wit or intelligence to get out of a situation?
He cuts the beanstalk down while the giant's going down at the same time. So it goes.
So he kills the giant.
That's right. Good. That's so true. And I know you
Jack
had
the
one more
Giant Slayer.
point to make as
Oh,
well.
yes. My other point to make is every time you read a story, you get a different lesson, and each person gets a different lesson.
That's right. So one thing that I wanted to talk about was the fears that we have can be sometimes really wonderfully expressed through the symbolism of fairy tales. And that, for instance, in a fairy tale like Hansel and Gretel, the children's fear is of being
Eaten by a cannibal.
eaten, yeah, exactly, by a cannibal, devoured, right? And or abandoned. Because they, like you were talking about Prime 34, about the, I've lost my train of thought. I think I'm getting very distracted because Prime is doing a lot of crazy things over here in the studio. So, the idea of being devoured, we know, children know that in a fairy tale, it's just a story, right? And so they can express those fears in a way that feels safe to them. Like in Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, the wild things say to Max, "I'll eat you up, I love you so." And Max said,
No!
and one thing I loved was something that Princess Star Pony is going to tell us about this Maurice Sendak book that I never knew, that I think is so hilarious and you will love as well.
That it wasn't where the wild things are. It's where the wild horses are. It was. But the author was also the illustrator. And
You said he couldn't draw.
he couldn't draw horses, so he just gave up and drew monsters.
Yeah, so he changed it to just wild things because he couldn't actually draw horses. And I don't feel like it would have been as beloved and recognized of a story if it had just been where the wild horses are. Like, wild horses are cool, but where the wild things are and the monsters that they are, and that kind of like, we don't really know what kind of creatures they are in this wild land, it gives it this special magic, I feel like, that makes it a classic.
They even made a movie.
Yeah, Where the Wild Things movie is very strange. So we also wanted to talk about one last thing, which is that the retellings for kids now harken back to the more subversive tellings of the folk tales of the old wives' tales that they were originally, of the wise women. Because we know that Disney did sort of whitewash them in a way to make them nicer, sweeter, more acceptable for children, and because they were putting them on the silver screen, right? And we talked about how kids find things more scary when they see them in person in movies and things like that. Or not in person, but in movies, and they can actually see them. But now there are book series, right? Can you tell us, each of you, can you tell us a little bit about the way that kids are now seeing these retellings of the fairy tales that include some of those darker, more subversive elements? I know that you've both been reading or hearing about some of these series.
Well, my favorite book series, like, ever is called The Sisters Grimm. And in it, there was a lot of gory things, and all the original stories were
By
what they
Brothers
were. All the original Brothers Grimm stories were in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So, like, what do one of the characters, or can you share with us, like, a little bit of the plot about one of the characters to show how it goes back to the original?
Like how...
One thing I know for sure is that the female characters, right? The girls and the women are given a lot of agency and strength, and they
Snow White
fight back.
Snow White was a karate teacher.
What the
Nice.
heck?
Yeah.
Who's a what? Okay.
Yeah, because in the original fairy tales, right? I think it was in the Brothers Grimm book. 60% of the characters with magical abilities were women.
Yeah.
Right? And the men that had, or boys that had magical abilities were often dwarves. But it was mostly women and girls who were magical and were really forces to reckon with. And then Disney kind of turned them into demure princesses who needed to be saved. Although they've changed in recent years, right? Because they've realized that
Moana.
girls are so much stronger.
Like how they have Brave,
Moana.
Moana, Mulan, all that.
oh yeah, they're even making a live action movie of that.
And how do you feel about that, both of you, that now you see girls and women having as much action and strength and bravery and fighting knowledge and ability as boys and men?
Okay.
I think that is really, really great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it inspiring to you?
Yes.
And what about you? Did you want to share with us any new... Prime, did you want to share with us any retellings of the fairy tales that you've enjoyed?
Oh, well, it's kind of a funny thing is also about the karate thing. As you probably know this series, it's called Shrek. In the second Shrek, Snow White pretends to be this lady in distress, but then all of a sudden all the other princesses run out and like birds start attacking the guards, these tree guards and stuff like that, because they're trying to get I think the ogre.
Oh my goodness. And that's funny to you?
Yeah, it was funny.
So you like stories, like you like the fairy tale retellings that are silly and funny and
Like Shrek.
subversive in that way. I think there's a lot to be said about subverting the order and the structure of society by using humor. Yeah, absolutely. Because they make fun of the prince in that one, right? He's a ridiculous character.
Oh, he's
Yeah.
in the Shrek one, he's Prince Farquaad. If you look to the right of the to the right of his flag looks like the Facebook sign.
That's silly.
And also, he's like short, like
It's like that.
So more like a dwarf.
dwarf, and
Although that might be considered a little bit rude to make fun of someone who's short. But I think they're just saying that his courage, his kindness, all of those things are small, right? It's a symbol for that.
And he sends someone else out to go fetch a princess for him.
Yeah, so he doesn't even go do it himself.
Yeah, and then he's all like, "Yeah, what's
Prime,
going
we
on?"
can't hear you. Prime has put a blanket over his head. And he's now messing up my bed
wait,
in the studio. I have a bed in the studio so that I can take a nap when these two exhaust me, which is all the time. Okay, I think it's time to listen to that mystery sound one last time and take another guess at it. Quack, quack, did you have any other final words for us?
2 words: quack, quack.
Those are most potent and poignant words. Thank
And
you.
I'll say some more at the end of the show.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we ready with that mystery
Oh, this isn't
sound? Uh-oh.
Technical difficulties.
Wrong one.
Uh-oh. We had the wrong mystery sound.
Technical
It's
difficulties.
okay. That's part that we're actually trying to show you. Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties here. Here we go. Any guesses?
Okay, here's the truth. The truth is...
Wait.
No guesses have come yet.
No guesses have come. Let's answer this call.
Ding, 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 ding.
Hello, yes. What guess do you have for the mystery sound?
Oh, hello, my name is Quack Quack, and my guess is that was singing from Frozen.
Yes, well, we did hear some singing from Frozen. That was a part of the mystery sound. But there was something else that it was a part of and that was going on behind it.
That was what we were trying to actually show.
So very good guess. Let's take one more call. Ring, ring. Hello.
Hello, I'm Midnight Chihuahua.
And what do you think the mystery sound was?
I think that the mystery sound was... Give me a second. I think that it was that Disneyland roller coaster I go to sometimes at Doggy Disneyland.
Oh, that's such a good guess. That's very close. You both are so close. I think that Disneyland was a part of it.
Yeah.
So Prime and Princess Star Unicorn, would you like to, at the count of 3, tell us what that sound was?
1, 2, 3! Disneyland's fireworks!
I hope we did not burst your eardrums when these two got very excited and screamed. It's Disneyland fireworks. That's awesome. Okay, so now we're going to just wrap it up. And thank you so much for listening. Some of the main points we talked about today are that the original fairy tales were dark and grim.
Dark and grim.
And that the retellings harken back to... Some of the retellings originally were a little bit sweeter and less subversive, but then now retellings like the Sisters Grimm, Fablehaven,
and Land of Stories
are bringing back some of those subversive elements to the stories, and that they might be for adults and children, as it just really depends on what work you put into them to create meaning. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us, listening to our podcast on fairy tales. I'll say goodbye. Let's hear a goodbye from Prime. You're not going to say goodbye, Prime?
Bye.
And what about you, Princess Star?
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.